Hello, everybody. Good afternoon. Welcome to this side event. If you need interpretation, as you saw when you were on your way in, there are headsets available, and I encourage you to find one so that you can follow the conversation. And because of the interpretation, I would like to remind the panelists to speak slowly and clearly. We're all always challenged by. Welcome you. And also, I want to welcome those of you who are joining online. I think we have several people I saw joining online, which is absolutely wonderful. I'm Lauren Baker. I'm with the Global Alliance for the Future of Food. We're an alliance of philanthropic foundations working together and with partners on food systems transformation. And we have 7 calls to action that we have organized our work around, and the first one is related to governance. So this is a topic that's very important to us, and there are 2 ways that we think about this governance issue. One is internally, as foundations, philanthropic foundations with legacies of extractive wealth and privilege, thinking about how we can disrupt those legacies and shift power. And then as philanthropic foundations, really thinking about our central mandate as being the supporting civil society to build power as part of the shifting power agenda. I'd like to thank the organizers, the co-organizers of this side event, the International Panel of Experts on Sustainable Food Systems, the CSIPM Working Group on Global Food Governance, Mexico, Department of Agriculture. Over the next hour, we'll be discussing human rights, rebalancing power. And indeed, in the plenary this morning, in the CSIPM briefing yesterday, these issues have been raised as central priorities by plenary speakers, by the Special Rapporteur on the Right to Food, by CSIPM delegates, with a focus on addressing the structural issues that hold back the deeper transformation that's required globally. It's clear that food systems transformation requires shifting power, and we need to think about this with attention and intentionality. So today we'll discuss what that looks like and interesting precedents and proposals that can inform a way forward. In the context of proliferating international initiatives, we see a fragmentation and also a deepening of power asymmetries. And so I know all of us here on the panel are concerned about this. And that really the central issue is that the people who are most affected by the multiple crises that we see playing out in the world are not centered in our discussions about the solutions, not centered in these initiatives that are proliferating. And really the pathways forward should be led by them and by people who are most affected. And so we're going to have a great conversation about this today. And the agenda is, we'll have a presentation by Shamali of the IPES-Food report that was published earlier this year, who's tipping the scales. The panel will address corporate capture and frameworks for control and managing this. We will have time to hear from all of you and interact with the panelists. Fingers crossed, I know we're a little bit behind schedule. And then we'll have a few short closing remarks. And so that's the way we've organized the hour, that time we have together. So I think without further ado, Shamali, I'll turn it over to you to set the scene for us and to talk about mechanisms of corporate capture before we shift to talk about mechanisms to really think differently about governance and center different voices in regards to shifting power. Shamali Gutal is Executive Director of Focus on the Global South and a member of the IPES panel for over 25 years. Her research and writing has concerned economic and social development in Asia, especially in the Mekong region and India, working with the topics of community resources, community resource rights, women's rights, food sovereignty, agrarian reform, and democratization of governance. She works in solidarity with progressive grassroots movements, unions, activists on the creation and governance of natural, social, and knowledge commons. So, Shalmali, over to you. Thank you so much for painting the picture for us and grounding our conversation today.
Thank you, Lauren. Good afternoon, everybody, and I'm very honored and privileged to be here with all of you and looking forward to our conversation today. And thank you to my colleague for helping move the slides for me. So I'm very happy today to present the key findings of the report by the International Panel of Experts in Sustainable Food Systems, IPES-Food, our report on who's tipping the scales, in which we raise attention and alarm about the new ways in which decision-making processes on food are being captured by corporate interest. Now, question is, how did this happen? Let me present some of the key findings to you. I think I should be able to, I did it, okay. So, I moved to slide 2 already, it's okay, thank you. So following ambitious and comprehensive institutional reform in 2009, member states in the CFS committed to making it the foremost inclusive multilateral platform to coordinate actions for eliminating hunger and ensuring food and nutrition security for all. The goals of the reformed CFS included making sure that the voices of all relevant actors, especially those most affected by hunger and malnutrition, are heard in policy debates on food and agriculture. Now, this goal is under threat. Well-funded multi-stakeholder initiatives and ad hoc food system and food crisis summits are sidestepping and undermining the CFS. For many food system actors, the 2021 UN Food System Summit, the UNFSS, was a watershed moment in drawing attention to corporate influence over public food governance through multi-stakeholder processes. The summit itself followed a 2019 strategic partnership that was signed between the United Nations and the World Economic Forum, the WEF, and initial planning for the UNFSS completely sidestepped the CFS. Many were concerned, with good reason, that the UNFSS, which opened the door widely to corporate involvement, was not transparent and was rife with conflicts of interest. Now, let's look at the historical context of corporate influence in governance. How did we get to this state of affairs? Briefly, it's important to recognize that the corporate creep into food governance is a process that has unfolded over several decades. Many of us recall that the 1970s were characterized by skepticism about the role of transnational corporations, and efforts were being carried out to bring transnational corporations to account through regulation. And in fact, there was even attempts to build a UN code of conduct for transnational corporations. But by the 1980s, the rise of neoliberal economic policies increasingly welcomed large businesses into governance fora at the same time that antitrust rules were weakened. In the 1990s, large agribusiness firms increasingly engaged in voluntary market-based governance initiatives and certification schemes. Many of you know well about the roundtables on sustainable palm, oil, soy, and so on. In the 2000s, agri-food firms began to engage in public-private partnerships, for example, the Global Alliance for Improved Nutrition, GAIN, and AGRA, and providing funding to public institutions, for example, the FAO partnership with CropLife and other industry lobby groups. In recent years, multi-stakeholder initiatives have become a key mechanism in global food governance, including in the UN setting, as was exemplified in the United Nations Food System Summit, the UNFSS. These kinds of partnerships between private sectors and international governance bodies create serious conflicts of interest. Moving to slide 4. But it's not just these visible mechanisms of multi-stakeholder initiatives and public-private partnerships and funding. Corporations are influencing food governance through a number of other ways. The more visible ones are these broad multi-stakeholder platforms, but they also pursue strategies that are less visible and less direct. They have market power through corporate concentration in the food system. They lobby behind closed doors and push actors who defend their corporate interests through revolving doors into regulatory spaces. They sponsor scientific research to shape policymakers' views, they give political donations, and they exercise structural influence over trade and investment agreements. Now, we need to question this new normal of corporate overreach. Through these various mechanisms, corporate involvement in the global governance of food and agriculture has become effectively normalized. But as we have noted in our report, there are huge problems with this approach. First, with respect to processes, this approach prioritizes stakeholders over rights holders, and it obscures the obligations of duty bearers, that are states and our governments, whose responsibility it is to uphold rights. Although the UNFSS claimed it was transparent, critics claim agendas were set behind the scenes where corporations tended to dominate, effectively excluding genuine civil society and grassroots social movement participation. Second, with respect to outcomes, corporate influence affects the quality and effectiveness of governance initiatives. In fact, it's incredibly difficult to find evidence demonstrating positive outcomes of multi-stakeholder initiatives and where they've achieved their goals. Rules tend to be weak because they're often watered down by commercial and vested economic interests. Third, concerning accountability, corporate-dominated governance efforts, such as multi-stakeholder initiatives, typically avoid rules that hold firms to account, both legally and financially, when their practices cause harm to people and nature. This enables corporate impunity for operations and practices and a lack of effective remedy and justice for those who have been harmed. It is essential that we rein in corporate power. Without action to address this new normal of corporate captured food systems and food governance, food systems will increasingly be shaped by private, corporate, and vested interests. Bold approaches are needed to counter the corporate takeover of the global food governance spaces. It is imperative to fundamentally level the playing field in food system decision-making and policy-making. In our report, we outline 3 overarching principles for action and 3 accompanying concrete recommendations, and these are my last points, Lauren. Now, these include, first, we need to address the outsized influence of transnational agri-food corporations at all levels of the food systems. This requires a multi-pronged approach. These include creating mechanisms to manage conflicts of interest, creating measures to reduce corporate market power, developing stricter rules on lobbying, spending, and campaign financing, as well as transparency in reporting, countering the shaping of science and public discourse by large corporations, and redirecting government resources from serving private corporate interests to serving public interests, especially of those who are the most affected by hunger, malnutrition, poverty, and livelihood insecurity. One concrete proposal we put forward to achieve these goals is to develop a UN-wide corporate accountability framework. Second, we need to democratize food governance to serve the public interest, including holding corporations accountable for human rights violations and environmental destruction. This would mean developing inclusive participation mechanisms grounded in human rights. These should prioritize the authentic participation of people's organizations, social movements, and other civil society actors, especially those most affected by the issues addressed in these spaces. The push to democratize the governance of food systems should start with the Committee on World Food Security, CFS, via the Civil Society and Indigenous Peoples Mechanism, the CSIPM. It was remarkable that initial planning for the UNFSS completely sidestepped the CFS, in effect undermining the CFS. Instead, the CFS urgently needs to be bolstered and strengthened so that it becomes a space where regional and global problems that threaten the food systems of small-scale food producers, workers, consumers, Indigenous peoples, local communities are examined and addressed, as was envisaged in the CFS reform. And third, we need to build up autonomous processes and spaces that center the voices, claims, and proposals of people's organizations and social movements. The agency and voice of women, gender diverse peoples, Indigenous peoples, frontline communities, they are being marginalized in policy, justice, and governance structures. So we must create autonomous processes and spaces for the claims and proposals of people's organizations and of social movements to be made and heard in their own terms, in their own language, through their own realities. This means that the agenda and decision-making for policy should be led and needs to be led by people's organizations and social movements. Resources that are adequate to needs for these need to be provided, and strategies and actions for addressing these extreme challenges and issues are determined by the participants themselves. And these autonomous processes and spaces have been built in the CFS through the CSIPM. In order for these voices to have meaningful impact on governance and policy making, we need to take the present opportunity that we have over the next 4 years to strengthen the inclusive multilateral nature of the CFS. So I thank you all again, and I invite you all to read our full report. There are copies available outside. You can also find it on the IPES-Food website. Thank you, and I'm looking forward to our discussion.
Thank you so much, Shalmali, and I'm really looking forward to thinking concretely about the proposals and recommendations in the report. And now we'll hear from our panelists. I want to move into the panel quickly because we're short on time. And the way that we've structured this is I will introduce each panelist, and then I have a question or a few questions for each of them. And you'll see that we do want to generate proposals for moving forward on this issue, and also thinking about the linkages with the CFS and how the CFS can support this agenda. And so our first panelist here on my right is Musa Sow. And Musa is president of the National Coordinating Organization of Farmer Associations of the Gambia, and second vice president of the West African Network of Peasant and Agricultural Producer Organizations, ROPA. He's a member of the CSIPM Coordination Committee for West Africa and focal point of the African Regional CSIPM space. He's the focal point for West Africa of the International Planning Committee for Food Sovereignty and a member of the IFAD Global Farmers Forum Steering Committee, as well as chair for West Africa and Central Africa. So please join me in welcoming Musa. And my questions for you are related to what you've done in the African regional CSIPM space to really think about how to block corporate capture of food systems, how to promote people-centered transformation, and what initiatives you've taken around this, and then why you feel it's important for the CFS to function as a strong platform for this work.
Interesting questions. I know it's not difficult to really deal with them. Thank you very much once again. Like I was introduced, I am a real advocate for food security in Africa. Looking at the question regarding the corporate captures, it is interesting to know that the new prime target for corporate capture in the world is Africa. One is because of our growing market. Secondly, because of our natural resources. We all know about that. The impact of the corporate capture and where it's really centered is around our land and our seeds. We all know that, the identity we have is not more than the seeds that is traditionally been owned by us. That's our identity. That's under threat because of the introduction of GMOs. They feel that, monoculture is the best way. And we said, no, look, we have our knowledge, we have ideas. There's no need of introducing anything new to us. We already know what is really good for us. Those seeds are our seeds, please let them stay with us. The other area of concentration is our land. There is a lot of land grabbing in Africa, being from the level of government, being from the level of the farmers. Let me share an interesting story. This was about last year. The US Embassy in the Gambia was given one of our national parks to build their embassy in Gambia. We said no. If you go to the US, there is no way that you can use your national park and give it out to the partners or people you think you can build cooperation with. The advocacy was very, very serious, very, very strong. We've used the social media. We used our multi-sectoral committees. In the end, they gave up and they gave the park back to us. So which was a very big success from that end. The CSIPM Africa region, looking at what is understood as a national pathway and also the Dakar Compact, for us is another opportunity to give the corporate powers a very easy way of taking our properties or land. And then the CSIPM Africa decided to organize a monitoring exercise to do a research on those national national pathways and also the Dakar Compact. And what we realize is that this is another way of giving them an opportunity to have a more easy access to those natural resources. And we feel that was not the best thing to do. And just to say that the prefects of the different engagement of the corporate powers, one of them is they influence our policies. They use our corridors. They support national parties and the political parties. They pay for whatever they need to do with them. One is the design policies that are in favor of them. That's what they want. They want policies that will be designed so that to have easy access of grabbing our naturals, including seeds. They lobby political parties and public policy makers and direct financing of public parties. Like usually we have our election time. This is when most of them would use whatever resources they have to support those political parties, meaning that there's a precondition to those parties, in assuming any position at national level that would be in favor of the corporate powers or corporate captures. Creating incentives for the executive too. We know very well that there are many countries where you find the corporate capture having significant grab of those natural resources. Most of them would have already seen with the executives, wherever they would be seen with them. I know it's something that we. Sorry, I have 1 minute. Okay. The next one also is we understand that from the monitoring exercise that there was a little knowledge from the people knowing the strategy and the tactics they use in grabbing our land. So what we do at the level of our countries, including Gambia, we do a lot of awareness creation. We also organize public dialogues with the traditional landowners, with traditional chiefs, governors of different regions. We also engage in educational campaign and negotiation on policies. We understand that the only way we can have it blocked is when we participate in the formulation, implementation, monitoring, evaluation, and also reporting on policies. So these are all the things that we do. We also try to create some watchdogs at national level to really continue informing, using the social media, to inform people that the corporate captures are not in our interest. In the end, we will go without our land, because we've seen that there's a proliferation of changing agricultural land into residential land, and which is a very big threat to food insecurity. We also do a lot of campaign and using the public media, to inform people, and also create monitoring schemes using other, partnering with other NGOs and also civil societies who are also speaking in the same direction with us. It's unfortunate that I have very little time, but I wish to have had enough of time to speak more. Thank you.
I wish you had more time to speak more as well. And we will also return we have lots of time for questions and answers, question period, as well as concluding remarks from you as well. And so now, Victor Suarez, I would like to introduce you. Victor Suarez is Deputy Minister of Agriculture, Under Secretary for Food Self-Sufficiency of the Government of Mexico. He is founder and executive director of ANEC, the National Association of Rural Commercialization Enterprises in Mexico. And since 1995, ANEC has promoted a strategy to allow direct access to agricultural markets for small and medium-sized producers of basic grains, with more than 50,000 members in 17 states. Victor served in the Mexican House of Representatives. He has also been part of numerous political, social, and peasant movements, both within Mexico and internationally. And Victor, my question for you is, you're in the middle of an extraordinary trade dispute underpinned by corporate overreach. How has Mexico been working to confront corporate capture? What human rights and environmental abuses have you observed in your country as a result of this overreach?
Sí, muchas gracias. El tema central para enfrentar el poder corporativo agroalimentario creciente en México y en todo el mundo es con gobiernos democráticos, con movimientos sociales progresistas. Y la forma de encarar el poder corporativo es romper, quebrar las bases de sustentación del poder corporativo, que son, uno, el modelo de agricultura industrial y el modelo de alimentación con ultraprocesados, y rompiendo también el paradigma falso de los mercados globales. ¿Y cuál es esa vía de rompimiento de esa esclavitud moderna? Es transitar hacia una política de autosuficiencia alimentaria, entendiendo la autosuficiencia no solamente la capacidad de producir los propios alimentos básicos, sino autosuficiencia en la capacidad de producir los propios insumos básicos para la producción agrícola y la autosuficiencia para la producción de las propias tecnologías productivas que integren los conocimientos ancestrales de las culturas campesinas e indígenas con los conocimientos científicos y tecnológicos modernos. Y la otra forma de romper este poder corporativo es quebrando la visión de la alimentación a base de alimentos ultraprocesados y bebidas con altos contenidos de azúcar añadida, y también generar la posibilidad de que tengamos un gobierno democrático que responda a los intereses del pueblo, a los intereses de su bienestar y a sus intereses en materia de derechos humanos. El tema de fondo es que todos los gobiernos, la mayoría de los gobiernos, están capturados por los intereses corporativos. Entonces, una parte de la lucha que no podemos obviar es la lucha por la democracia en nuestros países. Gobiernos que respondan al interés del pueblo y no estén tomando decisiones con base a conflicto de intereses. En este tenor, nosotros en México tenemos un gobierno democrático desde el 2018. Entonces, hemos encarado el tema de rescate del campo, autosuficiencia alimentaria sin conflicto de intereses. Como parte de este ejercicio de autonomía, de soberanía, de libertad, se ha emitido un decreto en México, un decreto presidencial para prohibir la siembra de maíz transgénico en México, defendiendo los derechos de los campesinos, el derecho a la diversidad genética de un país que es centro de origen del maíz, y también prohibiendo el glifosato, uno de los plaguicidas más peligrosos, y transitando hacia un modelo agroecológico. Bueno, este decreto presidencial que busca cambiar el paradigma de la agricultura y de la alimentación en función de los derechos humanos y del bienestar de la gente, ejerciendo nuestra soberanía alimentaria, ha sido controvertido por el gobierno de los Estados Unidos, respondiendo a los intereses de las transnacionales, de la biotecnología y de los agrotóxicos y del dominio comercial. Estamos en este proceso. En este punto, pues estamos generando todo un movimiento de argumentación y de defensa de este decreto con movilización social y popular en México, pero también ese es el momento de que la comunidad internacional, que también está luchando contra el poder corporativo global, se sume a esta controversia, porque las causas que estamos enarbolando en contra del dominio de la agricultura transgénica, pues también interesa a Estados Unidos, a Canadá y a todos los países. es romper poco a poco, como decían los vietnamitas, dedo por dedo, el poder de las transnacionales, y también poco a poco decir que sí es posible tener una agricultura para garantizar el derecho a la alimentación de los pueblos sin dependencia de las tecnologías riesgosas y esclavizantes como los transgénicos, y sin el modelo de los agrotóxicos, con las alternativas agroecológicas que integran conocimientos ancestrales con conocimientos campesinos. En ese sentido, también hacemos un llamado a que ustedes, quienes quieran, puedan participar en esta controversia constitucional como amicus curiae, y presentando también sus argumentos en defensa del derecho que tienen los pueblos a producir sus propios alimentos y a consumir sus propios alimentos sin que sea esto una determinante que establezca el poder corporativo, como si tuviéramos la necesidad de un nuevo imperialismo alimentario, un nuevo colonialismo alimentario. Así que en la controversia específica que tenemos en México en defensa de nuestro derecho a producir nuestros propios alimentos y no permitir que Estados Unidos y sus corporaciones pretendan decidir qué sembramos y qué comemos. Hemos sembrado y consumido 8,000 años el maíz en toda la historia de nuestro país, y ahora llega Estados Unidos a decirnos, tú tienes que sembrar maíz transgénico, y también nos quieren decir, tú tienes que comer tortillas con maíz transgénico. Eso no lo hemos aceptado ni lo vamos a aceptar, y esta lucha también, creo yo, es una lucha nacional, pero también internacional, contra el poder corporativo, y ese poder corporativo lo vamos a ir debilitando y cambiando desde abajo hacia arriba. Por eso también llamamos a las articulaciones y alianzas entre países y pueblos progresistas. El día de ayer hubo un encuentro convocado por el presidente de México, el licenciado Andrés Manuel López Obrador, en Palenque, en donde participaron países como Belice, Colombia, Costa Rica, Cuba, El Salvador, Haití, Honduras, México, Panamá y Venezuela, para enfrentar los temas de la migración, pero con un enfoque de atacar las causas estructurales que la provocan. Sugiero después, con tiempo, abordar los acuerdos de este encuentro, y es también donde también a nivel de países local, cercanos y vecinos, tenemos que generar otro tipo de alianzas para romper la dependencia del modelo global y del modelo corporativo, y también generar coaliciones y estrategias de ayuda mutua y de complementación horizontal entre países del sur. Gracias.
Thank you so much. Really interesting proposals coming forward. And also for another side event topic later, to really dig into the link that you articulated, Victor, between the fossil fuel industry, agrochemical industry, and how that leads to a lock-in of the demand for ultra-processed foods, which I think is a really interesting connection. So we're going to shift to a speaker, a panelist who we have online now, I hope. Daniel, that you're with us. Daniel Dorado is a lawyer with a master's in law specializing. Hi, Daniel, I do see you up on the screen. Welcome. Thanks for joining us. So he's a lawyer, master's in law specializing in constitutional law. He's the director of the Tobacco Control Campaign from Corporate Accountability, an international organization with more than 40 years experience challenging the abuses of transnational corporations. Daniel follows multilateral processes like the UNFCCC, the Pandemic Treaty and Plastics Treaty, and will be sharing his expertise on the World Health Organization Framework Convention on Tobacco Control. So this is a precedent around the global efforts to address conflicts of interest and liability in international policymaker, and we're trying to bring in some of these precedents and frameworks from other domains that can inform this conversation. He also serves as the Latin American and Caribbean co-regional coordinator for the Global Alliance for Tobacco Control, is vice president for the Ecuadorian Tobacco Control Interinstitutional Committee, and a member of the Cancer Research UK and International Prevention Advisory Group. So Daniel, thank you again for joining us. The question on the table for you is, what of these UN frameworks can we take inspiration from? For example, all the great work that you've done on the World Health Organization's tobacco control framework. What has made this work stand out, and what have been the impacts of these frameworks?
¿Cómo están? Un saludo. Muchas gracias por la invitación. ¿Me confirman si me escuchan?
Sí, gracias.
Gracias. Y por favor, he preparado unas diapositivas muy concretas. Si las pudieran poner en pantalla me ayudan bastante. Pero mientras tanto voy comenzando con algunas consideraciones. Nuevamente, muchísimas gracias por la invitación. Me honra mucho poder compartir algunas reflexiones, principalmente sobre lo que han sido los aprendizajes del Convenio Marco de la Organización Mundial de la Salud para control de tabaco y su adopción de provisiones para contrarrestar principalmente la interferencia y la captura corporativa de la industria tabacalera. Quisiera declarar también que ni Corporate Accountability ni yo recibimos financiamiento, ningún tipo, y tenemos algún tipo de relación ni con la industria tabacalera, ni con la industria, ni con la agroindustria, ni con la industria de alimentos y bebidas ultraprocesados, ni con las empresas de combustibles fósiles. Por favor, si vamos a la siguiente diapositiva. Y previo a entrar en las reflexiones, quizás me pareció significativo compartir un poco del porqué de la necesidad de regular la captura corporativa y la interferencia de la industria. Y bueno, quizás mucho de esto ya ustedes en las presentaciones que he ido escuchando lo han mencionado, pero nuevamente es bastante significativo siempre tener esto a colación, porque el libro de tácticas de interferencia de la industria tabacalera, como las pueden ver, influencia en elecciones, tácticas de lobby, manipulación de evidencia científica, acciones de responsabilidad social corporativa o empresarial, mecanismos de puerta giratoria, entre otros, han sido tácticas que por más de 100 años la industria ha venido posicionando, articulando, consolidando, pero también otras empresas transnacionales han venido de alguna manera o replicando o también en colaboración con la industria tabacalera, porque no hay que olvidar que estas empresas actúan en conjunto para posicionar sus intereses, posicionar sus intereses dentro de la agenda pública, pero más aún, posicionar estos intereses para seguir lucrándose a favor de las expensas de los derechos humanos, del debilitamiento de políticas públicas, entre otros. Si vamos a la siguiente, por favor. En este orden, hacia el año 2000, entre 1998 y 2000, se comienza a dar la discusión de cómo en el seno de las Naciones Unidas, principalmente en el seno de la Organización Mundial de la Salud, se puede articular un tratado internacional en materia de salud pública que, por un lado, pueda contrarrestar la epidemia y las consecuencias del tabaquismo, que para esa época cobraba la vida de alrededor de 1 o 2 millones de personas a nivel global, pero más aún, cómo adoptar un mecanismo que pueda contrarrestar la interferencia de la industria tabacalera y, en lo posible, contribuir a que los estados partes a ese instrumento pudieran adoptar mecanismos legales o jurídicos para utilizar regímenes de responsabilidad. Es así como hacia el año 2003 se adopta el Convenio Marco del Control del Tabaco, el primer instrumento que se adopta bajo los auspicios de la Organización Mundial de la Salud. Y quizás en las preguntas podamos hablar un poco más, pero estas son las dos provisiones que quizás quería dejar como mensaje principal. Este instrumento es pionero en adoptar dos disposiciones en el marco del derecho internacional. Uno, su artículo 5.3, que establece que todos los estados partes a este instrumento deben proteger los intereses irreconciliables que existen con la industria tabacalera al momento de diseñar políticas de salud pública relacionadas con el control del tabaco. Y dos, el artículo 19 que tiene que ver con temas de responsabilidad. El acápite que he sacado solamente es el primer párrafo del artículo completo, pero básicamente lo que dispone es que los estados, en el marco de su soberanía, pueden usar sus regímenes. El artículo cita dos, pero da espacio para que usen cualquier otro tipo de régimen de responsabilidad, sus marcos civil y de responsabilidad penal, para responsabilizar a la industria tabacalera, pero aún así utilizar marcos de compensación cuando esto suceda. Estas disposiciones han sido pioneras. Este instrumento a la fecha lleva 20 años y si vamos a la siguiente diapositiva, es inspirador ver cómo en lo largo de estos 20 años, un término relativamente corto para un instrumento que es joven, se han venido adoptando otros instrumentos que refuerzan estos mecanismos para blindar de la interferencia y la captura corporativa de la industria tabacalera. En el año 2018, en el marco de las conferencias internacionales, en este instrumento cada 2 años los estados partes a este convenio y a un protocolo que fue adoptado en el 2018 para temas relacionados con el comercio ilícito de los productos de tabaco. Las partes se reunieron porque una de las cuestiones con la que la industria era y sigue siendo bastante hábil era el tema de interferir en la conformación de las delegaciones de los estados partes a estas reuniones, bien directa o indirectamente, y un grupo de países pioneros en el tema, así como con el apoyo de sociedad civil, desde el año 2016 se hizo mucha labor de abogacía para aterrizar en esta decisión que les estoy proyectando en pantalla. Es la decisión que se titula la maximización de la transparencia, una decisión que a mi criterio resulta ser pionera en el marco del derecho internacional porque establece que las partes al momento de la conformación de sus delegaciones para participar en estas reuniones, por el mecanismo que consideren adecuado en el marco de su soberanía, deben indicar que han observado las provisiones en materia de conflicto de interés del convenio marco, así como también otras cuestiones que se han ido desarrollando para blindar. Y esta provisión se hace extensiva tanto para los observadores como para los medios de comunicación, como para el público en general. Y ya con el minuto que me queda, si pasamos a la siguiente, por favor. ¿Cuáles son algunos de los aprendizajes y algunos elementos que pueden servir de marco para los temas de los sistemas alimentarios, para la agenda de alimentación en general? Es cierto que el convenio marco está sentando precedentes y sigue consolidando precedentes para tratar los conflictos de intereses, que se consolida como un esfuerzo para contrarrestar la interferencia de la industria tabacalera. De hecho, ese artículo 5.3 que les mencioné se establece como la columna vertebral del convenio marco y busca que se implementen toda la implementación de manera holística en este instrumento. Y asimismo, busca esa dupla con el artículo relacionado con responsabilidad, porque si bien es cierto que se debe blindar, no es menos cierto que a lo largo de estos 20 años, pero por más de 100 años, la industria tabacalera ha venido generando importantes consecuencias, no solo en la agenda pública, al medio ambiente, entre otros costos, y los estados están perfectamente legitimados para usar sus mecanismos de responsabilidad para hacerlos responsables de sus daños y consecuencias. Esto creo que habla por sí solo en estos 3 mensajes de guías o marcos que se pudieran extrapolar a la agenda de salud pública, de alimentación, perdón, para temas de seguir avanzando la interferencia corporativa, el tema de maximización de la transparencia y bueno, las cuestiones particulares que puedan adoptarse para los temas de responsabilidad. Entiendo que Magdalena Ackerman ha compartido con ustedes unas copias de un artículo que escribimos junto con Sofía Monsalve y mi colega Ashka Naik sobre reflexión, sobre más en detalle sobre qué aprendizajes se pueden tomar de este instrumento internacional, invitarlas a que lo puedan leer. Y bueno, muchas gracias nuevamente por la invitación.
Thank you so much, Daniel. And I used to work in public health, where healthy public policy, the foundation of that is, of course, participatory democratic decision-making processes. And so public health in their mandate has this pathway to addressing these issues like you so clearly outlined. So looking forward to having more conversation on this moving forward. Hala, I'm going to turn it to you now to provide some sort of synthesis for us and make the important links that we want to make to the CFS agenda and work plan. So Hala Barakat is an archaeobotanist, which I love. I've been really looking forward to meeting you. And as part of the CSIPM Coordination Committee, she currently coordinates the CSIPM Global Food Governance Working Group. She's part of the Habitat International Coalition, has a PhD in paleoecology from the University of Aix-Marseille in France, and has worked or works with a number of organizations. And I won't list them all, but on topics of nature conservation, on food sovereignty, on the history of food, on the right to food, and in particular with a focus in the Arab world. So really wonderful to have you with us, Hala, and to meet you. Yes, if you could offer some reflections on what you've heard this afternoon and pathways forward, that would be wonderful.
Thank you so much for the opportunity and for introducing me. Yes, I mean, it was 4 wonderful interventions, and I will quickly synthesize what we listened to in the context of the mechanisms and the initiatives that have been taken towards shifting and rebalancing powers. So I start with the global perspective from the WHO and how an international convention was endorsed to allow states to counteract the influence of a very strong corporate such as the tobacco industry and to hold them accountable. And it's also important here to note that there is a role for the member states, of course, but also for the civil society organization, a role in this process. And that if it's been doable, has been done with the tobacco industry, then of course we have a lot of hope that this can be done for other strong corporate captures that we see around us. And then also from the regional perspective, we listen to the explanation of what is happening, for example, in Africa. Of course, what's happening in Africa is also happening in many other regions. And then what could be done to shift this? One of the things that are clear from Musa's intervention is that we need to be able to monitor what's happening. In that case, the monitoring of the national pathways issued from the UNFSS, but were quickly shifted towards becoming another opportunity for corporate captures, leading to policies that are designed for their benefits, for their political privilege, while the people of the region of Africa are not aware of the danger. So it's very important to monitor what's happening and also to work towards public awareness through campaigns. and do this quickly, and I'll come back to this a little bit later. And then, of course, we heard from Mexico a great initiative and a very good example of how democratic governance and involvement of social movements would lead to eliminating of conflict of interest within the policies, responding to the real needs of people, forging and exercising sovereignty and autonomy, preventing genetically modified organisms, pesticides, fertilizers, and focusing on using the indigenous crops, the knowledge related to them, and the genetic diversity within a country. Mexico is a very good example for this. So this is bringing around a shift in the paradigm of food production. And of course, also we heard that this has been fought and challenged. And so these initiatives need to be endorsed and supported by the other countries and the international community. And then other issues that come to my mind also within this is the concept of the idea of co-optation of concepts. The fact that these companies are very influential, as we heard, they are also fast and furious, and they have resources, and they are penetrating all spaces, and they use publicity as their main weapon. So, as mentioned, strategies are developing and adapted. Their strategies are developing and adapting very quickly. I recall last year at the COP27, I was attending, but instead of staying in Sharm, I stayed in a small camp in a protected area. And my neighbor in this camp was an employee of Shell. She came in after her week of COP to relax. But so we had these interesting conversations about what are they doing there. And you realize that this company now has this whole section about how to deal with what's going to come out of COP as quickly as possible. So they are trying to dominate and impose their agendas, of course, and also to take up the space. So we need to be vigilant to prevent emptying the concepts that we're working for. And this, coming back to CFS, this can be done through anchoring our concepts in human rights, the framework, of course, of right to food. And now we have, within the next MIPAO, this coordination function. Yes, I'm done. Coordination function. And this is possibly somewhere where we can start. We can start basing the processes through the MIPA on right to food, and also democratizing decisions and ensuring the inclusivity of these decisions. This is just a hint on what we have in front of us, and opening a discussion and a dialogue on how to further use this coordination function of the CFS to put forward important issues for us. One of them, of course, is how to shift the power and restore the balance and limit the capture, the corporate capture. Thank you.
Thank you so much. We have 15 minutes left in the side event, and I'm glad we've preserved some time for questions. I think we have people online who may also have questions. So far, no, but if you're online and you'd like to ask a question, we'd really like to engage you in this way. And I'd like to open it up. So I think we've started a really interesting conversation here on the panel. Any thoughts from all of you? Any questions, any comments? Yes. Do we have a microphone? How are we managing the Q&A so people can hear online? Do you want to come up and? Thank you so much. So we'll start here in the front. And then I see 1, 2 other questions.
Thanks, everyone. My name is Laurine Azoulay. I work for CCFD Terre Solidaire in France. Thank you for the very, very interesting presentations. It's really very useful for us to have this information. So my question was about the process in the World Health Organization. I was wondering if there were discussions about other sectors than the tobacco industry and maybe agribusinesses sector and agrichemical sector, and if we could have more information about that. And the other question was about World Trade Organization. Is there some lack of coherence at some point if we have these conventions in the World Health Organizations, but in the other hand, we have mechanisms that allow industries and corporations to sue countries on some other ground fields? So, thanks.
Great, okay, great question. And Daniel, it would be great for you to come back up, Shalmali as well, and then Victor too. Maybe you could say more about the alliance you mentioned and the work that's happening in Latin America, if you're able to do that. So Daniel, are you with us still? Do you want to answer questions
Sí,
about whether
aquí
there are
estoy.
other? Yeah, there you are.
Sí,
Great.
muchísimas gracias
Other
por
precedents, yeah.
muchísimas gracias por la pregunta. Bueno, en efecto, este es uno de los grandes desafíos que hay en el marco del sistema de Naciones Unidas. Desde Corporate Accountability, uno de nuestros ejes de campaña transversal, porque nuestra organización también trabaja o tiene programas en materia de cambio climático, derecho a la alimentación, derecho al agua, lo que ha inspirado mucho de nuestro marco estratégico es en efecto desde hace 40 años venir replicando y avanzando, uno, para lograr este tipo de provisiones y dos, para que el precedente de tabaco o de la campaña del convenio marco pueda extenderse a otros escenarios de discusión multilateral, como lo es, por ejemplo, la Convención Marco de Naciones Unidas sobre Cambio Climático, el proceso actual que está para la adopción de un tratado de plásticos, el proceso actual de discusión del tratado de las pandemias. En efecto, ustedes pues ya podrán imaginarse lo que resumí en 5 minutos de ninguna manera puede ilustrar todas las complejidades de lo que fue la adopción de provisiones como el artículo 5.3 y el artículo 19 hacia el año 2000. ¿Qué puedo decir? Hubo mucho compromiso de los estados parte y este es un tema, la verdad, fundamental, la voluntad política y el respaldo articulado que hubo con sociedad civil permitió que estas provisiones pudieran salir adelante, pero hasta el último minuto de la negociación estas provisiones estuvieron por caerse. En estos otros escenarios de discusión, como les he comentado, la Convención de Naciones Unidas sobre Cambio Climático, el Tratado de Plásticos, el Tratado de las Pandemias, estos temas están resonando y la experiencia de control del tabaco se está teniendo en cuenta porque, uno, es claro que hay muchas complejidades y la necesidad de que se puedan adoptar. En efecto, uno de los llamados que van a encontrar en el artículo que Magdalena está compartiendo, pero también que otras organizaciones que están presentes ahí trabajan en la necesidad de que exista correspondencia, porque sí llama notoriamente la atención que existan marcos regulatorios tan fuertes para una agenda en especial en el sistema de Naciones Unidas y que se demuestre que es posible y que en los otros temas las cuestiones de alguna manera o se frenen o cuesten implementarse.
Daniel, I'm going to I probably interrupted you at a terrible moment, but I am going to interrupt because we are so short on time. I want to make sure that we have at least a few more questions and hear from a few others as well. So Shalmali, did you want to come in too on this question?
Thank you. Yes, just a quick response here. With the World Trade Organization, the dispute settlement mechanism has been abolished, but that doesn't mean that the teeth of these free trade and investment agreements have gone away, because there are a burgeoning of plurilateral, regional, mega trade and investment agreements, no? And many of them have actually taken the most dangerous provisions in the World Trade Organization to much further levels. So for example, with TRIPS, the trade-related intellectual property rights, is TRIPS Plus, And if you go through what's in TRIPS Plus, it builds on TRIPS, but its home, shall we say, its fodder is TRIPS, but it goes way beyond. And its implications for public health and for seed sovereignty and food sovereignty and for food safety is tremendous, you know? So there's definitely a contradiction there. And then one of the most dangerous legal mechanisms that corporations use is what's called ISDS, the Investor State Dispute Settlement Mechanism. ISDS is really ISDS literally takes the power of governments to protect the public interest away from them. You know, and it's really one of the most dangerous things. Then ISDS is it's absolute essential. What's the word for it? It goes hand. It's there in every trade and investment agreement. So any company can sue a government for any legislation, any move, any policy to protect the public interest, if it affects the corporate profit even slightly. And the penalties are huge. So what ISDS has is a chilling effect. It prevents governments from enacting public policies because they are so scared of being sued. And they know, and many of the governments that are subject to ISDS provisions are already countries that have been through structural adjustment, austerity programs, debt, you know, and they're already struggling with weak infrastructure.
Hala.
Yes, just a quick continuation of the same, along the same line is also the international agreements such as UPOV, for the protection of new plant varieties, genetic varieties now, not only plants but also animals. And where, if you look on the site, you will see the number of countries that have signed and ratified this agreement over the last decade is enormous, including my country, Egypt, while our fight to stop this from happening has completely not succeeded in doing this, because there is a huge pressure from the exporters of fruits to Europe mainly. And so this is also something to do with the awareness and let's say the lack of awareness among not only the public, but also the decision makers, unfortunately.
Thank you, Hala. There were two questions here, and why don't we take them together? I think you're next. Please.
Merci. Maurizio Reale du Comité économique et social européen. Ma question, je suis grosso modo d'accord avec ce que vient de dire Victor Suarez, mais je vais lui poser une question. Qu'est-ce que vous en pensez de la génétique green? Parce que ça peut être l'alternative importante à ce que vous disiez contre les OGM. Je suis d'accord avec le glyphosate qu'il faut l'utiliser seulement avec une certaine formule très, disons, concrète, mais pas pour l'essiccation des produits. Mais surtout la génétique green, que c'est une nouvelle forme qui peut donner des réponses pour moi. Merci.
I think we have a few, let's take a few other questions and comments. So we'll take this gentleman here and then over to you. Yes, we're going to take a few questions together.
Yeah, no problem. Thank you. Peter Schmidt from the European Economic and Social Committee. I have two points and a question included in this. The one is on democratizing the process, and the other one is how to encourage and empower the grassroots movements in order to get into this process. So here my concrete point is, so we in the European Economic and Social Committee, we made a proposal on building food policy councils, because we think this is one way to empower people to get into this process. Because the question for us is how to do it. Once you have the rights-based approach, how you want to do it then concretely in order to bring this in. So we say on the European, on the national, on the local and level that we need this kind of policy council. The second point is, you mentioned that already, on the interests. How we do address these interests, what you have been talking about. According to my knowledge, I mean, in the recent time when we had this food price crisis, we had a raise of the food prices. It was pure greed. It was pure greed. So why do we not really address this on this point?
Great. I think we all have lots to say about all of these topics. We'll take one more comment or question. Please keep it short so we can hear from the panelists. And then we'll hopefully have time for another round. Do you want
Je
to
parle français, soit de la Tunisie. La première, parce que je voulais rebondir par rapport à l'intervention par rapport au tabac au niveau de l'OMC. Nous, on sait très bien que l'OMS, elle est interdite de faire une étude toxicologique sur les organismes génétiquement modifiés. Comment ça s'est fait? Comment vous expliquez que toute une étude bien large, bien étendue par rapport au tabac, le tabac, il est expérimentalement par rapport à la médecine, il n'a jamais été à l'origine d'un cancer. Il y a autre chose qui cause le cancer, mais ce n'est pas le tabac. Ça, c'est des publications scientifiques sur échelle internationale. Comment vous expliquez que l'OMS, elle est en train de faire toute cette gamme d'études sur le tabac et elle oublie les OGM et elle est interdite de par Monsanto de faire une étude toxicologique. La deuxième, par rapport à tout ce qui est semences, est-ce qu'on est aujourd'hui sujette que des semences génétiques modifiées pour ne pas avoir le devenir de ces organismes par rapport à nos corps. La troisième, par rapport aux pesticides agricoles, j'imagine que toutes les monocultures, elles sont issues de même gènes et donc du coup fallait-il revoir avec le conseil comment ça se fait qu'une organisation qui ne peut pas nous défendre et défendre nos cultures, elle peut faire une étude toxicologique. Merci.
Great. I think this is why the public health experience is being elevated here. So thank you for that comment. We'll take one more question here. And then I think we're going to return to the panel for a round of closing comments from everyone.
Muchas gracias. Yo soy André Lucy, de Mecanismo. Y una pregunta que es muy de dimensión concreta, objetiva. Las personas en sus comunidades tienen un poder asimétrico. Entonces, cuando hay una violación de derecho, las personas no tienen acceso a justicia, no hay abogados. En cuanto a las corporaciones, ya hay equipos de abogados, cuando los gobiernos tienen sus abogados propios. Entonces, en la Declaración del Derecho de Camponeses y Camponesas, hay un artículo sobre acceso a justicia. ¿Cómo es posible garantizar la justicia para los grupos camponeses y camponesas en nuestras comunidades? Y también, cómo los sistemas de justicia en los países, como los defensores públicos, los ministerios públicos, promotores públicos, pueden conocer más estas dimensiones de los conflictos y garantizar los derechos de las personas.
Thank you. Yep. How can we use the existing tools and mechanisms we have? All right. Why don't we take a round of closing comments? I know we're at time, but everything was a bit delayed, so we probably can be too. So maybe 1 or 2 minutes. Victor and Musa, we'll start with you since you haven't participated in the Q&A so much. So thank you very much.
Solo quiero enfatizar en el momento que estamos viviendo y que es un momento de oportunidades para recapitular una nueva vía, una nueva estrategia para garantizar el derecho a la alimentación, los derechos humanos en todos los países, en todos los sistemas alimentarios. Primer punto es que estamos en una declinación de un poder hegemónico a nivel mundial, al mismo tiempo que un ascenso del poder corporativo, un poder corporativo desnacionalizado, no tiene nación. Tanto hay poder corporativo en China, en Rusia, en muchos otros países, y entonces está también roto el modelo de comercio global a partir de la pandemia, a partir de la crisis ruso-ucraniana y a partir de que no resuelve los temas de la alimentación para el mundo. Entonces es el momento también de plantearse no sustituir una hegemonía por otra, sino avanzar en la generación de un mundo multipolar con muchos poderes en en las regiones del mundo, reequilibrando los poderes en declinación. Entonces, pero es necesario desde mi punto de vista pasar de la resistencia a la transformación, es el momento y el centro de todo esto también es asumir un proceso de descolonización, ¿no? De neoimperialismo que estuvo atrás del modelo de neoliberal, del modelo de globalización con TLCs, TRIPS y demás, y pasar a un tema de poner en el centro la soberanía alimentaria y la cooperación para el desarrollo, ya no los tratados de libre comercio, sino acuerdos de cooperación para el desarrollo entre países. Los dos ejes es autosuficiencia alimentaria en tanto y cuanto sea posible, romper al máximo posible. Y esto también es un tema de sobrevivencia, porque ya no puedes estar dependiendo de los mercados globales y de qué sucede en Rusia, Ucrania, qué sucede en el Medio Oriente con el genocidio de Israel sobre el pueblo palestino. Se va a escalar el conflicto y mientras vas a seguir dependiendo de las importaciones de alimentos básicos y de fertilizantes, es el momento de darle la vuelta a eso y también el momento de dejar atrás los alimentos ultraprocesados. La base del poder corporativo es la agricultura industrial y el sistema de alimentación ultraprocesados y de dependencia de las tecnologías aparentemente modernas que solamente refuerzan la dependencia. Por eso hoy el tema de fondo es atreverse a romper con el colonialismo y el imperialismo alimentario desde abajo, desde los países. Y una parte central, si no luchamos para que haya democracia en nuestros países y gobiernos democráticos que respondan a los intereses del pueblo, pues no vamos a poder ir avanzando en otros niveles. Esto es lo que querría yo comentar como comentario final.
Thank you so much, Victor. That was great. Victor's dare, I'll call that. That was great. So let's just hear really briefly, Musa, from you, and then very, very short comment, Shamali and Hala, just because you spoke earlier in the Q&A, and then we'll wrap things up.
Thank you very much. Maybe I would want to respond on the genetic green mention. On the genetic green mentioned by my dear colleague, I don't know the reasons why the West feel that we don't have ideas. We do have ideas. What we need is join us in what we believe in, or in our traditional seeds, and we will have solutions. So because I wouldn't see what we want is a production that is socially acceptable by our people. That's what we want. It's not that we are not looking at the economic viability or the environmental friendly, it's what we accept as people. And that's the idea that we want. This genetic green that you mentioned is just the same idea as when they were introducing fertilizer in our countries. We were promised that the fertilizer was good to our soils, it was good to our health. In the end, we realized that it wasn't good. There was no, it wasn't good to our soils, it wasn't good to our health. What we want, a partnership that respects our ideas, a partnership that believes that we have ideas that you can support, ideas that our people accept as production means. Not an idea that has to do with genetical, influencing the genetics of anything. We have ideas, please join us in our ideas if you really want us to partner with you. I wouldn't understand for the fact that even chemicals that are banned in Europe are exported to Africa. Would you call that a genuine partnership? I don't believe if this is a partnership. So, and the other thing is also is, by conclusion, is the fact that our governments are weak, for the fact that they cannot defend against corporate influence and also geopolitical influence. The CFS, I assume, is the only international tool or platform where we as civil society want to stay in. Because you know, there's G7, there's the G20, there's WTO. These are all platforms where our government cannot defend themselves. We have an opportunity as civil society, CSIPM, to defend the CFS. And that's our interest, to defend CFS, because that's the only avenue where you and I and whoever is here has a voice. to negotiate on the MyPow, to negotiate in the policy coordination. The rest is, for us, is not in, it's not in our interest. It's in the interest of the West. And I think that's my conclusion. Thank you.
Thank you. Hala, short comment from you.
I mean, I really don't have much to add to all of this, and but something I took away from Victor there. It's just time for change, yes. Time of change and time for change, and I love the optimistic approach. So let's leave it there at the optimistic and try to do something. Thank you.
Thanks, Hala.
Well, in my closing, I'd like to say that, food and water can't be siloed. And the right to food cannot be separated from other human rights and all human rights, right? Everybody knows that. And in this context, I want to just draw attention to all of us to the huge profits that corporations make from conflicts, crises, and wars and occupations. And this is really important because they play very key roles in triggering, prolonging, maintaining, and worsening conflicts. They benefit and profit in ways that are not even visible, in particular ways. And they're also, we also need to draw attention to the impunity of corporations from both legal and material accountability for human rights abuses and for other harm. No? So this includes, for example, arms manufacturing, but also, their role in the pharmaceutical industry, the way they profit from post-conflict reconstruction and transitions, the way they acquire land and natural resources from, in terms of, from how we say illegal seizures and so on. Let's not forget that Agent Orange was produced by Dow Chemicals and Monsanto. And that was one of the biggest weapons of war in the Indochina War. And that hasn't changed. So these corporations are everywhere. And a little bit of due diligence is not going to make a difference. They need to be brought to justice. We need strong legal accountability, and we need our governments to do this. So our governments have to work for us, not for finance capital, not for corporations.
This has been a really, really interesting conversation, and I feel like we need, a whole long workshop on all of these topics. And I won't say much in way of conclusion because I know we need to move on. But we do have an opportunity next year with the 20th anniversary of the right to food. This was brought up in the plenary, the CSIPM briefing yesterday. And maybe we can use that as a way to really advance this agenda and really understand, dig into the proposals, the very concrete proposals that were surfaced here today, to see how we can address, disclosure, accountability, conflict of interest, and create a framework that serves the deep food systems transformation that we've been talking about. So thank you very much to all the panelists. Thanks to all of you who've joined us today for the conversation, and to everybody online.